This is the Station for Negotiation podcast, episode number 50. My name is Gene Killian. I've been a lawyer and professional negotiator for 40 years. Folks, I don't know when you're listening to this, but I am recording it at the beginning of a new year. And I thought, what better way to start the new year with than talking about illegal gambling and the mob? So that's where we're going to start. And I want to start with by just recalling a bit that the late, great comedian Richard Pryor had. He used to talk about when he was a young comedian and he was working in a mob nightclub years and years ago. And he noticed that the mob never overtly threatened violence. They would use your intelligence against you to persuade you. So they would say to you something like, "You're an intelligent person, and you understand that it's very difficult to walk without knees." So Pryor used to tell lots of mob stories along those lines. I thought they were funny. And of course, the mob has this romantic kind of niche in Americana. Probably started with the movie The Godfather, or at least it was emphasized in the movie The Godfather, where the mob had this sense of honor and these codes. And of course, we went through the John Gotti stuff in New York in the 80s. He was a big celebrity in New York. But really what the mob does is pretty awful. I mean, there's no way around it. It's kind of sociopathic. But I wanted to spend some time today looking at how the mob negotiates in a very specific area, the area of illegal gambling. And, you know, it's amazing that even though a lot of gambling is now legal, we still have people committing crimes in connection with gambling. And I had here an article from ESPN's website that appeared in November 2025. Let me just read a little bit of it. This is just a few months ago as I'm recording this. Cleveland Guardians pitchers Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz were charged with fraud, conspiracy, and bribery stemming from an alleged scheme to rig individual pitches that led to gamblers winning hundreds of thousands of dollars, according to an indictment unsealed by federal prosecutors on Sunday. Ortiz, 26, was arrested Sunday morning in Boston and will appear in court Monday, according to prosecutors. Clase, 27, is not in custody. Prosecutors at the Eastern District of New York, the Brooklyn-based United States Attorney's Office that levied similar charges against NBA player Terry Rozier and multiple coaches in late October, said in the indictment that Clase arranged with a bettor as early as May 2023 to throw specific pitches for balls so that the gambler could place prop bets and profit. Ortiz, prosecutors said, joined the scheme in June 2025, and between the two, gamblers won at least $450,000 wagering on their pitches, while Clase and Ortiz were given kickbacks for their participation. Clase and Ortiz each could face up to 20 years in prison for wire fraud conspiracy, 20 years for honest services wire fraud conspiracy, 20 years for a money laundering conspiracy, and 5 years for conspiracy to influence sporting events by bribery, according to prosecutors. The defendants deprived the Cleveland Guardians and Major League Baseball of their honest services, Joseph Nocella Jr., the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District, said in a statement. They defrauded the online betting platforms where the bets were placed, and they betrayed America's pastime. Integrity, honesty, and fair play are part of the DNA of professional sports. When corruption infiltrates the sport, it brings disgrace not only to the participants, but damages the public trust in an institution that is vital and dear to all of us. I find those statements pretty funny because we have a history in the United States of famous professional athletes getting caught gambling and disgraced publicly. We have, if you're not a baseball fan, there's a player named Pete Rose, a famous American baseball player who would have been in the Hall of Fame but for the fact that he cheated and gambled. He broke rules and he engaged in gambling and then lied about it to the commissioner of baseball, so they've kept him out of the Hall of Fame. And of course, going back years, we had the famous 1919 Chicago Black Sox scandal in which the baseball team, the Chicago White Sox, got together with their friends in organized crime, and through the 1919 World Series to the Cincinnati Reds. So we have this long history of people getting kicked out of sports. All those White Sox players were banned from baseball, by the way. We have this long history of people getting kicked out of sports for engaging in illegal gambling. And now we've come to the point where we have had full circle. We have bookies advertising during professional sports events on television, on radio. We have bookies with advertisements on the outfield walls and sometimes projected on the pitcher's mound in baseball. We have, during football and baseball games, announcers giving the odds of the games during the game. So the idea that, to use the U.S. Attorney's words, that we have a public trust in an institution that has honesty and fair play and integrity, it's kind of funny, ironically funny, but there you go. But gambling's always going to be here. And, it's interesting. You would think, that with these guys making millions and millions of dollars, they wouldn't have to gamble anymore, but they do. Part of the reason is a lot of them just piss away their money. So if you're a young person listening to this, get your money sense in order. Have a budget. Figure out how money works. Make sure you're saving. Make sure you have adequate income to justify what you're spending entertainment dollars on. Be very careful about gambling. Gambling is very destructive. I actually think online gambling is incredibly destructive because it's addictive. Our cell phones are basically crack pipes. We have them in our hands all day long. You go to a restaurant and people are not even talking to each other. They're on their cell phones. And these gambling apps, these legal gambling apps, make things worse because you're just sitting there with nothing to do. You start placing bets. Now, here's the difference between legal gambling and illegal gambling. If you place bets with a gambling app, they're going to have a limit on how much you can bet, and you have to pay money up front. The difference between that and illegal gambling, when you gamble with the mob, is illegal gambling does not require you to put money up front. It's all done on credit. So you can just walk up to an illegal bookmaker who's usually financed by the mob, and say to that illegal bookmaker, I want to put $1,000 down on the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday, and that's it. They write it in a book, and now you're you put $1,000, and you owe them $1,000 if you lose that bet, and you better pay it. Which brings me to a guy named Michael Franzese. Michael Franzese, his last name is spelled Franzese, is a former mob boss in New York. He was a captain with the Colombo crime family, one of the major crime families in New York back in the 70s and 80s. He has an interesting background. His father was a famous mobster, Sonny Franzese, and actually Michael was not going to go into organized crime. He's actually a very smart guy. Not to say mobsters aren't smart, but he was a very smart guy who decided to go down a different track. He was actually studying to become a doctor. And then his father, Sonny Franzese, got busted, ended up in federal penitentiary on a long prison sentence. And Michael Franzese figured he's got to drop out of school and start making some money to help his family. And he gravitates toward organized crime, gets involved with the Colombo crime family. And his big thing was a very sophisticated scam in which he bought interests in gas stations in the New York, New Jersey area and skimmed off the money that was supposed to go to the government for taxes and stole it through this sophisticated scam. And he made so much money. I mean, he brought in millions and millions and millions of dollars doing this. And at one point, he was living high on the hog. He had expensive homes in California and Florida and in New York. He had a private helicopter. He had a private plane. But as it so often does, the ceiling eventually crashed in, and he ended up in federal penitentiary himself, and he did hard time. I mean, they had him in solitary confinement for a long time, and it was miserable. And one of the prison guards took pity on him at one point and gave him a Bible. He said, here's a Bible to read while you're sitting there in solitary confinement. And at first, Michael Franzese didn't want to have anything to do with this, just thought it was stupid. But eventually, because he had nothing else to do, started reading the Bible. And if you believe his story, and I don't have a reason not to believe it, he decided to change his life and become a devout Christian. And so eventually he got out of jail. He has, as I said, a very popular YouTube channel now. He's got several million people following him there. And his YouTube videos are interesting. I mean, he's got a lot of content on there about life in the mob, what it was like to be a mobster, how the mob business model worked. And it's kind of fascinating to see how these people operated. He also hawks wine. He's got a winery. He sells wine, and he's written several books, and he hawks those through his YouTube channel as well. But listen, if you have a few minutes, you got nothing better to do, go over to YouTube, check out Michael Franzese's videos, especially the ones on the organized crime history. I think you'll find them interesting. But I wanted to look at the way he negotiated when he was a mobster, and specifically the way he convinced people to engage in illegal gambling schemes. Now, if you're not a sports fan or a gambler, I'm about to tell a story that deals with something called the point spread. And all you really need to know about a point spread is it's a handicapping system. So what bookmakers want is they want you to bet. They want bettors to come out with an equal amount on both sides of the equation. So let's say you have the Dallas Cowboys football team playing the New York Giants football team. They want an equal amount bet on both sides of that equation because they're going to have to pay out on one of the sides. They make their money on VIG. In other words, they take a piece of the action that's bet. And so they want an equal amount bet on both sides because hopefully whatever's bet on the losing team will be used to pay out the winners, right? So you want to keep that balanced, and you take your money from your cut of the gambling action. So a point spread is like this. Say the Cowboys are favored by 6.5 points. They have to win by at least 7 points in order for you to win your bet on the Cowboys. Conversely, if you bet on the Giants, you add 6.5 points to their actual score. So if they scored 20 in the game, they actually scored 26.5 for gambling purposes. So you're not really betting on a team. You're betting on the margin of victory. That's the way this works. And so when I talk about a point spread in this story I'm about to tell, that's what we're talking about. I got this from his YouTube page. This is a small portion of a transcript from one of the stories he tells on his YouTube page. And here he's talking about how back in the 80s, the mob would convince college athletes to shave points from basketball games so that they would not cover the point spread. And the mob would gamble on inside information and make money on it. So he's going to talk about how this happens. The other thing to keep in mind as I tell this story is that nowadays, college athletes are being paid. A lot of them are being paid legally. Back in the day, they could not be paid. So the way they would be compensated is they would get a scholarship. A lot of them, not all of them, would get a scholarship from the college they were playing for. So if a kid went to play basketball for Notre Dame might, in exchange for that, give him free education. That's the way that worked. Nowadays, the whole picture has changed. But this business of the players not getting paid is going to play into this story. I want you to listen very carefully to how Michael Franzese convinces this player to buy into this point shaving scheme. I'm going to go through the whole transcript, then I'll come back and we'll comment on some of the techniques because he uses legitimate negotiating techniques to achieve an illegitimate purpose. We'll talk about some of the negotiating techniques he uses. So here's what he says. We start to meet some of the players that hang out in the club that we're in. We get friendly with them. We target them. Let's call this one a guard. He's a senior guard on a college basketball team. Eventually, after we get to know them a little bit and we buy them a drink, send them over a few girls, make them feel good. Then we move in for the kill. We invite them over. They sit down and I make them comfortable. I start to question one. You're a pretty good player, but you're 6'1". You're kind of short for basketball. You're not exactly going to the pros. You know that, right? He says, yeah. Well, what does this school do for you? Every time you play, there's 18,000 fans in the stands and they're not paying you any money. I know they're paying you for your education, but I hear you're a C student. You're like a 2.0. So you're not exactly a brain surgeon. What are you going to do when you get out of here? Let me ask you another question. How much money do you have in your pocket? Oh, I'm broke. You're broke. Your mother's riding around in an old car. Your girlfriend's pregnant. I know that. Why are you broke? The school's making a lot of money on you. Why don't you have some of it? Let me tell you what we're going to do, okay? I'm going to make your life easier for you. You got 10 games left. You're favored to win on Wednesday night by 10 points. Don't win by 10 points. Now, we don't want you to throw the games. You know, we're big fans of the team. But don't win by 10. Win by 6, win by 5, win by 7, but don't cover the spread. Who's going to know? What does your coach care? As long as you're winning the game, he doesn't care. Okay, you do that. Here's what I'm going to do. And at this point, I take $10,000 out of my pocket and I put it on the table. I push it over to him. Put that in your pocket. You do that for me 10 times, you got $100,000. Don't put it in the bank. Put it under your mattress when you leave school. Look what you got. You got $100,000. But here's what happens every single time. For those of you who play sports, you know this. It's a lot harder to underperform than it is to do your best. You're on the court. Everybody's watching you. Fans are cheering you. Your teammates are watching. Your coach is watching. It's very hard to underperform. It really is. Okay, so he'll come back after 2-3 games and say, hey, Mr. Mike, I got myself $30,000. It's more money than I ever had. I can't do this anymore emotionally. It's driving me crazy. I'm having a real hard time. I got to get out. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Stop. What do you mean? We made a deal. You got 7 more games to go unless you want me to go talk to your coach. I'll tell them how good you were playing. You want to tell your girlfriend, your mom and dad, know how proud they'll be of you? You want to go to the cops? I don't care. I'll get myself bailed out in 5 minutes. You're done when I tell you you're done. And at that point in time, we own that young man. His life is destroyed. And people, I'm not saying this out of pride. I'm telling you how it really goes. So that's the story Franzese tells. Now, when you were listening to that, what did you pick up about the way he negotiated other than the overt threats at the end? Not a big believer in threats in any negotiation. I guess it works for mobsters because of the implicit threat of violence. But what did you pick up? Let's think about a few things. First of all, did you notice the use of patience? He's in no hurry to press the issue and to make the ask. He takes his time. Remember what he said. Goes and hangs out in the club where they are. They come in. He chats them up a little bit. He takes his time. Gets friendly with them. After a while, maybe he sends over a few drinks. He might send over a few girls to talk to them. And only after he develops this relationship, only after he takes time to develop a personal relationship with them, does he start to push the issue a little bit at a time. So he has this attitude of letting the opportunity come to him and not forcing it. Now, he's a mobster. I don't want you to emulate mobsters, but I do want you to think about how effective this negotiating technique is. Be patient. Don't be in a hurry to get to the ask. Take a real interest in the other person you're negotiating with and move slowly. I always tell people, try to slow the negotiation down. If you're moving too fast, you can turn the other person off, first of all. And second of all, if you're moving too fast, you might miss information, bits of information that can help you make a better deal for yourself. So be patient. That's the first thing that Franzese does in this discussion. He's very, very patient. Second, did you notice the tactical use of calibrated questions? If you've read Chris Voss's book, Don't Split the Difference, you know he spends a lot of time talking about calibrated questions, which are open-ended questions that don't suggest an answer overtly, but that are designed to move the negotiation ahead. So let's think about some of the questions that Franzese uses in this discussion. What does that school do for you? I mean, you're there, you're going to practices, there's 18,000 people there, they're making a fortune. What are they doing for you? Calibrated question. How about this? I know they're paying for your education, but you're a C student and you're not going to be playing in the National Basketball Association when you get out of here. So what are you going to do when you get out of here? What's the next phase of your life look like? Calibrated question. How much money do you have in your pocket? Calibrated question. The kid says, I'm broke. He says, you're broke. Why are you broke? Calibrated question. Then he says, let me tell you what we're going to do, okay? Phrases that as a question. And then he says, we're going to do this. I'm going to give you $10,000 every time you help me shave points during the next 10 ball games. You shave points and help me win my bets. And then Franzese says, who's going to know? Calibrated question. Why does your coach care as long as he's winning? Again, calibrated question. So Michael Franzese may have been involved in illegal activity. He was involved in illegal activity, but he's not stupid. He knows how to use calibrated questions tactically to get what he wants and to sink the hook in the prospect. So I don't want you to be, again, a mobster, but I do want you to think about how in your next negotiation or business discussion, you can use calibrated questions to sink the hook, so to speak. What's the third thing that you might notice from this conversation? I'm sure there's other things you can notice. I'm only going to pick three. Here's the third one. The use of strategic empathy. Notice how this conversation goes. Michael Franzese at no point in this conversation talks about himself. He asks about the player's life. Your mother's driving a crappy car. Your girlfriend's pregnant. Tell me what you're going to do when you get out of here, because look, this school is making a fortune on you. How much money of that are you getting? What are you going to do in the next phase of your life? He hammers that home. He looks at things from the kid's perspective, from the player's perspective, before he ever puts the money on the table and tries to push this situation forward. So you have three things that I want you to think about as a result of this mobster conversation here. First, use of patience. Second, tactical use of calibrated questions. Third, the use of strategic empathy. Now, when you engage in empathy, I want you to be sincere about it. I don't get the sense that Michael Franzese was particularly sincere in his concern for this poor player's life. So I'll just call that strategic empathy. But let's flip this around. Let's think about from the player's perspective, where he went wrong in agreeing to go into this deal. There are a number of things that I think we need to think about when we are involved in a business discussion or negotiation of any type. First of all, always cultivate a sense of healthy suspicion. Why me? Why is this guy making this proposal to me? And if it sounds too good to be true, what's the reason for this guy's generosity? Be very suspicious. Now, you don't want to show that you're suspicious. You don't want to necessarily confront the person with, why are you doing this? Obviously there's this nefarious purpose behind this. You just want to listen with a healthy sense of suspicion, right? So that's good advice for any business negotiation you're involved in. Second is something I think we've talked about before. Always be thinking about, how do I get out of this? If I don't like this arrangement after we've had it in practice for a while, how do I terminate it? How do I get out? So this athlete, this kid in this conversation, didn't think about that. All he thought about was, holy shit, there's $10,000 in cash on the table. Grab it. He didn't stop there and think about, what if this doesn't go well? How do I get out? And he ends up going back to Franzese after 2 or 3 games, very guilty, saying, I need to get out of this. And Franzese says, sorry, we have a deal, and you're going to do what we agreed upon. And of course, there's an implicit threat, never overt there, of violence, which of course we don't encourage here in any way. You should never, ever even think about that. But you should always think about, whenever you're entering into a business contract or business arrangement, what's the termination provision look like? And is it favorable to me if I need to get out of this? Always, always, always think about that. Always, always, always look at the termination provision in the contract and make sure you can get out easily if you have to. And the The third thing from the player's perspective, and this is the most important thing of anything that I will discuss with you today, you must have clear ethical lines in your business dealings. You must know what lines you will never, ever cross. And then, folks, you must never cross them. And I want to hammer that home with my favorite business book of all time, The West Point Way of Leadership by Larry Donathorn, which, if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you know I frequently refer to. And I just want to read a brief passage from the book. It's about a conversation that Jack Welch, the former chairman of General Electric, had at a college campus once. And here's what Donathorn writes. At a recent panel discussion at an Ivy League university, a hypothetical situation was proposed by Jack Welch, the chairman of General Electric, to the audience. You are representing a U.S. company in a South American dictatorship, he said, and about to close a deal that would represent $90 million to the company. Your counterpart in the arrangement assures you that the deal looks very good, that the contract is close to being signed. The only loose end is a matter of depositing $1 million in a certain Swiss bank account. How many of you would make the deposit? Welch asked the audience. About a third of the students raised their hands, which left him momentarily speechless. Finally, he said, "They're not teaching you everything you need to know here." Folks, if there's one thing you need to know, it's where your lines are and the fact that you won't cross them. So this student, this athlete, this kid in this conversation didn't have a clear sense of where his ethical lines were, and he did cross them. And remember something. One of the things that, or the main thing that got him was the cash on the table, and it's easy to jump at a deal when you're desperate. When you're desperate, when your business is going a little bit sideways and somebody comes to you with a proposition that they're going to put a lot of cash on the table, you got to take a look at this and think, is this in accord with my ethical values? Are they asking me to do anything that bothers me ethically? And if your instinct tells you this isn't right, what I'm doing here isn't right, get out immediately. Drop it. There's always going to be another opportunity. You'll always find another way. There's always a way. You don't have to jump at this just because it looks like it's the only way out of your situation. It's never the only way out. There are always other options. So keep your ethical lines clear. And folks, that's all I have for you today on the Station for Negotiation. So this is Gene Killian signing off and reminding you once again that negotiation is life. Hey, thanks for listening to the Station for Negotiation podcast. Until next time, you can keep up with us on social media at the following places. On X, formerly known as Twitter, it's at STN4Negotiation. That's at STN4Negotiation. On Facebook, you can hit us up at facebook.com/Station4Negotiation pod. That's facebook.com/Station4Negotiation pod. Over on Instagram, you can reach us at Station4Negotiation. Again, that's at Station4Negotiation. On LinkedIn, Station4Negotiation podcast. Again, that's Station4Negotiation podcast. Over on YouTube, we're at Station4Negotiation. That's at Station4Negotiation. If you want to shoot us an email, you can do that at Station4Negotiationpod@gmail.com. That's Station4Negotiationpod@gmail.com. So we'll see you next time on the Station for Negotiation podcast. And until then, remember, negotiation is life.